I think at times it's real easy to get caught up focusing on pursuing our destiny, right? Going after who it is that we feel like we're supposed to become, what it is that we're supposed to be, pursuing our destiny. Pursuing our destiny is often really connected with taking, right? Because to pursue your destiny, it takes time. It might take resource. You might need to take resource or money to get further education so you can pursue your destiny. It might take time away from some things that you'd rather be doing or some people that you'd rather be with, pursuing our destiny. I think somewhere, though, along the line, we start to think about, leaving a legacy. It's different than pursuing a destiny. Leaving a legacy is maybe like how we want to be remembered, right? What we want to be remembered for. And leaving a legacy is often deeply connected with giving. Because leaving a legacy is where you give your time to. It's mentoring that child, right? It is giving time to those that you care deeply about, that you want to be known for as a good dad or husband, right? It's about giving, and leaving a legacy is deeply connected to generosity. And we launch a brand new series. I'll be teaching this weekend and next week. It's just 2 weeks, and it's called Hunting Generosity, right? And literally this weekend and then next weekend, I will step off the platform next weekend and almost head straight to the airport. And I'll be going on a 10-day mission trip to India. So leave in the afternoon that next Sunday. Amazing, while I'm there, I am going to be able to participate with our small team in the 20th anniversary of the Doulos Theological Seminary in India. This is our partnership that we've had with the Pothins for over 20 years in India. They run a seminary there, a Bible school. And then as students graduate this 2-year program, they go and launch a church. And because of our long-standing relationship with them, the resources that have been poured out, and their faithfulness in that community, folks, they have launched and planted nearly 700 churches in India. That is seriously amazing. Like, don't golf clap that, okay? Like, across all of our campuses, Dormont, East End, let's go. Let's clap for that. That's a big deal. Like, it seriously is. And what we've decided to do is we're gonna up our resource over the next few years. Because of your giving, but also because of a small piece of our parking lot that we sold out front to Chick-fil-A, we're going to take some of that resource over the next several years, and we're going to turbo the work that the Pothins do. And while I'm there, we're going to take some footage. We're going to take some footage of what's happening. You're going to meet some of the church planters that your resources are going to. We're going to send it back to the production team here. They're going to turn it around. And while we're still in India, in 2 weeks from now, you're going to see what it is that's happening over there. It is truly amazing. Northway, like, I hope you're excited about that. That's some serious stuff going on. I would encourage you and invite you and ask you to pray. Right? We're going to be in some very heavily Hindu and Muslim-dominated areas that are not necessarily friendly to Christian church planters. But God has pressed this sort of trip, this resource, their work squarely on my heart, and I want to pursue it. I want to hunt it down. When God says go, don't say no. Do it. And we've titled this series Hunting Generosity for a specific reason. Because I felt like the term generosity, sometimes it can be heard as soft. You know what I mean? Sometimes when we think generosity, we think of words like kindness, and that's a great word, right? Or big-hearted or compassion. Sometimes even we think of charity, right, might come to mind. And what I want to talk about this week and next week is not soft. And at the close of the series, you and only you are going to have a tough decision to make. Will you hunt this thing down, called generosity? Will you choose to pursue it? And a couple things I want to say right up front. This series is about generosity as it applies to Christ followers, okay? So this is God's expectations in regards to generosity as it comes to those that are following Christ. If you're here today at any of our locations and you are not a Christ follower, then let me just talk directly to you for just a moment. Maybe you're here and you're just trying to sort it out. You don't really know who God is. You're just trying to figure it out. Maybe you grew up around church, but you wouldn't really call yourself a follower of Jesus. No matter where you're at in that journey, hear me, I'm so glad that you're here. You being here is why we are here. The church exists in order to reveal who God is, right? Through word, but also through the actions of the church, right? We are here so those of you that currently do not know the Lord will have the opportunity to figure it out for yourself. So if there aren't any non-believers at any of our 5 locations today, then we're failing at what we're doing as a church. And also get this, if you're not following Christ and you're here today, then these next 2 weeks, you don't have to feel any obligation, right? Because this is just sort of to give you an idea then what God's expectation is of Christ followers when it comes to generosity. However, Christ followers, Wexford, right? Sewickley Valley, East End, Dormont, Oakland, I want you to know something right up front, that this hunting over these next couple weeks can be tough. There's going to be some tough things to hear and maybe even some more tough things to actually do. I want to set up this series by laying out 2 key foundational points that I hope will allow me to speak boldly, and in doing so, that you won't tune me out. So here's 2 really key foundational points that I want you to know. One, we don't talk about this much at Northway. You know, I went back and looked. The last time we did a teaching series on generosity or on money or on giving or on tithing or anything in that category was 2011. The last time that we did just even a single sermon on this was over 2 years ago. The last major all Northway capital campaign that we held here was called the Next 30, and that was all the way back in 2011. So please hear me. At the close of this series, we're not launching a capital campaign. At the close of this series, there's not going to be an envelope in your bulletin for a special project that we're going to ask you for. In fact, across all of our campuses, I've asked them to take the offering before the sermon, because I want this to be about you and not about Northway. The second key foundational point is this. If I were to tell you that there was a way for you to find more favor with God, that there was a way that you could gain trust in the eyes of God, further blessings, wouldn't you want me to tell you? Right? Do you want God to trust you with bigger things? Do you want God to bless you? Do you want God to show favor? Do you want his face to shine upon you? And I say this really with a lot of conviction. And I think I even want to just say it as in a form of an apology for not talking about this much over the last several years. Because I truly believe for some of you, it might have prevented you from additional blessings and favor and trust with God. I want to take the next several minutes and to the best of my ability talk about the facts of generosity, of giving, of tithing. And let me start by asking you this, and please don't raise your hands. You can be really honest with yourself here, not with me. How many of you walked in today and you're sort of stressed out? And a big part of that stress, or maybe all of that stress, is because of finances, right? Maybe you look at your monthly income and what you're spending is as much of or more than what you got coming in. Maybe you're currently unemployed or underemployed, right? Maybe when it comes to your finance, you can step back and you say, man, I'm trying to do the right thing when it comes to my finances, but I've made so many past foolish mistakes that it's just crushing me. Maybe some of you are in a pretty decent place like right now financially, and you're not super stressed out, but you know on the inside that you're only one major car repair, right? Or your furnace dying from being completely upside down. And maybe some of you are even in a really decent spot financially right now, but you're still stressed out a little bit because, like, the future, man, you got college education for your kids, retirement. There's that trip you really want to take your spouse on, but you just don't have the cash, and it's causing some anxiety. Well, there's good news that God has a lot to say about this. And folks, it's far more encouraging than it is discouraging. It's far more life-giving than it is life-taking. In the Old Testament, there's a story that's been preserved and recorded about a woman who is seriously stressed out about her finances. So together, if you want to, you can turn to 2 Kings chapter 4. It's in your notes. It'll be up on the screens also. And let's do a little generosity hunting through the eyes of this woman. 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1, it says this, "Now the wife of one of the sons of the prophets cried to Elisha." I'll sort of unpack that in a minute. "Your servant, my husband, is dead, And you know that your servant, he feared the Lord, but the creditor has come to take my children to be his slaves. Now, just unpack here, just a minute, right? This woman is stressed out. Her husband has passed away. He's the spiritual leader of the region and her provider. And he dies, and she is completely worried here, that you can tell, because apparently he's left some debt. And the collection agencies have showed up now. And in this time, it would have been completely lawful for them to take her sons and put them to work in order to pay off whatever that debt was. She's in a panic here. So verse 2, pick it up, and says, and Elisha said to her, now Elisha's a prophet in the region. He says, what shall I do for you? Tell me, what have you in the house? And she said, your servant has nothing in the house except for a jar of oil. So Elisha's the prophet in this town, and he asked this unusual question. Did you pick up on that? What do you have? What do you have to work with? He's basically saying to her. An interesting thing about God, he's always interested in where we are right now. He's not interested necessarily as where we'll be someday. He's interested in now. And I think often what we say to God is someday. Someday, this is what I'm going to do for you, God, right? See, God's interested in today. God wants to work with whatever you've got in your financial situation today, stressful or not. He wants to work in the right now. So the story goes on in verse 3. Then he said to her, go outside, borrow vessels, that's like pots and jars, from all your neighbors, empty vessels, and not too few, like get a lot of them. Then go in and shut the door behind yourself and your sons and pour into all these vessels. And when one is full, set it aside. So take this little bit of oil you got, pour into the vessel, and when it's full, set it aside. So she went from him and shut the door behind herself with her son. So he asked her to go and collect some pots and jars from the neighbors. She's got to be thinking, this is like humiliating. And she's also, you got to be thinking, she's thinking to herself, like, what if this is all just nonsense? Do you ever do the what if game with God? You know, God, I'd love to be more generous, but what if my car breaks down? God, I'd love to be more generous, but what if they raise my rent? What if I end up taking a pay cut at work, right? We play that what if game, but this woman, because of her situation, she's in such a bad spot, she decides to trust God. Even with the what ifs, and she demonstrates trusting God by doing what the prophet, and the prophet would be the mouthpiece for God, she demonstrates that by doing what she was told. And the story goes on. It says, and as she poured this little bit of oil that she had and brought the vessels to her, when the vessels were first full, she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there's not another. And then the oil stopped flowing. She trusts God with all she had, this little bit of oil. And this miracle takes place. God fills every single jar they collected from that to the brim. In verse 7, it concludes, she came and told the man of God, and he said, go and sell the oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on the rest. She trusted God, not just with her mind, but with her actions. See, trusting God is demonstrating it with our actions, and they are important to God. Now, that's her story, right? Let's apply that to us for a little bit. When we talk about financial pressure, I think we often talk about money and budgets and debt and income, and those things are all important. But I believe there's something deeper than that. See, as Christ followers, when we are financially stressed, so if that's you right now, I wonder if it's more of a trust issue than a money issue. I think it's amazing sometimes that a lot of us maybe here today have placed our trust in eternity, like our forever, with Jesus Christ, right? We've placed our trust in our eternity. That's a pretty big deal, right? It's huge, but we haven't trusted him with our today when it comes to our finances. Just like God did with the woman in this story, he wants us to demonstrate that we trust him completely. And here's the greatest part of all of this. It's not complicated, right? God has this very simple way of revealing our hearts to him on this issue. And the word God uses to deal with this is the word tithe. And I want to break that word down just for a few minutes. Now, don't tune out with me. Stay here. First of all, I just want some common misconceptions about what a tithe is, right? First, a tithe is not about money. It has everything to do about, do you trust God? Secondly, a tithe is not about giving. Right? I think sometimes I'll hear somebody say, I tithe from time to time whenever I'm able. But see, what you're really saying there is that you give from time to time whenever you're able. Those words, they're not interchangeable. Tithing is not giving. Third, many people, I think, sometimes, if they purchase something, from a Christian organization or a retailer, maybe that equals a tithe, right? I had somebody a few years ago come up to me around Christmas time and tell me that they bought all of their Christmas gifts from the Family Christian Bookstore, and they bought gift certificates from Chick-fil-A. And he said, those are Christian-based companies. So this December, that's where I placed my tithe. And he came out of the holiday thinking that he had tithed, but what he really did was just shopped, right? Tithing is not shopping. And the fourth thing is this: tithing is not charity. Charity is giving to your favorite organization, a local hospital, a college that you attended, or some other great Christian or non-Christian charity doing a wonderful thing. That's charity, and charity is awesome, but charity is not tithing. So when God talks about tithing, let me tell you what he says it is. First, he says, tithing is simply returning to God what is God's. Everything belongs to God. Romans 11:36 says this: for from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. It's all his. I think, and I tend to sometimes have this misconception that the things I have are mine, right? I mean, I worked for it. I earned it. It's my house. It's my stuff. But the reality is, if I were to die today, someone else would have my stuff tomorrow. It's not mine. I just get to use it for a little while. Tithing is simply giving back to God what is already his. For me, again, sometimes I struggle here, particularly when I've been fairly successful at something, or I've worked really hard and it's something I'm really good at. And I say, I'm really good at this and I worked really hard at it, so it's mine. But I need to be reminded what Deuteronomy 18:8 says. Deuteronomy 8:18 says, you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth. He's the one that gave you the smarts and the hard work ethic. He's the one that gave you all that, to gain that. So I want all of us, including me, to understand this. It's all his. We just get to use it. So let's get specific as to what the tithe is. Many places in the Bible it could go here. Leviticus 27:30, it says this: 1/10 of the produce of the land, whether grain from the fields or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord and must be set apart to him as holy. God makes this really simple. 1/10. God's saying it all belongs to me, to God. You keep 90%. And you give me back 1/10. And it's really not any more complicated than that. But see, there's a concept here that I really think that we've got to hunt when it comes to this and wrestle with it. And again, lots of places I could go, but Proverbs 3, verse 9 and 10 says this: honor the Lord with your wealth and with your first fruits of all your produce. Man, this is so powerful. Then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will be bursting with wine. This should really bring us a lot of peace. Because what's happening is if you bring God the first 10th, the tithe, it says he's going to bless your 90%. That's what tithing is. If we honor God with the first 10th, he blesses the rest. And please don't miss that word wealth in there, right? The word wealth, because I think so often I'll sometimes hear people say, well, I'm not sure I can do that, but I can give God my time, and I can give him some of my, I can serve, and I can use my talents and my skills. And please hear me, serving the church and serving God with your time is really, really important. But in this context, right, whenever they say the word tithe is mentioned, it's speaking about your wealth. It's speaking about your resource. In the book of Malachi, There's this group of people that they're acting like they trust in God, but really they're just putting on a show. And how do I know that? Because God calls them out. And it's found in Malachi 3, verse 6. It says this, "For I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, O children of Jacob, are not consumed. From the days of your fathers you have turned aside from my statutes and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says the Lord of hosts. But you say, how shall we return?" And this is God. This is powerful. He says, "Will man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you?" Like God, you can tell him this. He's upset. For generations, his people have been talking a good game, but they're not following him. And they say, well, wait a second, how? How have we been doing this? And God's response is so clear. He says, "In your tithes and contributions, you are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you." Like, this is serious. He's basically saying, you have been talking and taking what is mine and saying and acting like it's yours. He's just saying it there. You've been cheating me. And that thing when he talks about a curse, he's just basically saying life is not going to go well for you. So let me remind you, he's coming back here now in verse 10. Let me remind you, and he says, bring the full tithe into the storehouse. And you can study this on your own. I'm just telling you that most sort of rational theologians and scholars agree that that word storehouse is the Old Testament word for temple, which would be the New Testament word for the church. If you bring me, he's saying, the full 10%, the full tithe to the church, here's what he'll say. He says, goes on, "that there may be food in my house, and thereby," man, this line is so powerful, "put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts. If I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down a blessing for you until there is no more need." That is exactly what happened to the woman, right, in the story, who lost her husband. She gave God what he asked for, and he took care of her. See, this text is God without a filter on this topic, just to be frank. He's saying, instead of cheating me, why don't you trust me? God is saying, if you're not tithing, you're robbing me. If you want to be blessed further, trusted with more, if you want my full favor to shine upon you, stop robbing me and tithe. Do you know that there's no other place in the entire Bible where God says, test me? He's basically saying, I dare you. No other spot except for this topic here. That is really straightforward, and I think sometimes it can be a little bit of an uncomfortable text, right? So far, I've talked about what a tithe is not, and I've talked about what a tithe is. So if you're okay, let's get slightly more uncomfortable, okay? The idea of respecting God is the idea of putting God above everything else and making him number one. And it's not just with our lips, and it's not just showing up on the weekends and singing songs or serving around Northway. It's about putting our money where our mouth is. It is putting God before all of our fears, all of our desires, all of our needs, all of our concerns, all of our destiny, all of our stresses, all of our what-ifs. And I will go as far as to say this. I do not think there is any more tangible way for you to demonstrate to God that you trust him than with the tithe. So now again, we're being honest, right? And I know that some of you are saying, Scott, like, you don't understand. If I were to do this, I'd need to make some massive changes in my life. Like 10%. To do that means I'm going to have to make some serious sacrifices. And I think God's reaction to that would be, this is not Pastor Scott's reaction, this is God's reaction to a statement like that. Exactly. I think God would say, because there's something else that's in the number one spot in your life right now. And I want to be number one. And something needs to be knocked from there. So this has been tough stuff, right? I'll lighten up in a minute, but not yet. So I've been around church and Christians for a long time, right? And I've seen over and over that we as Christians, right, we have the ability to come up with a lot of excuses to not do the things that God says to do, right? So I'm sure right now, many of us across all of our locations, you've come up with a lot of reasons why it's not necessary to tithe. Can I just tell you something? You're right. You don't have to give 10% so that he can bless the other 90%. You don't have to do that. I don't know why you wouldn't, because it seems like an amazing offer. So you don't have to, because God said in the text I read, if you do this, I will, right? So you don't have to. So let me just take that off the table. You know, I've heard Christians say a couple things here around this topic. Some of them will say, well, this was introduced in the Old Testament, Scott, and we're in the New Testament covenant now. You know, folks, it carries on into the New Testament. Why do I say that? Because Jesus spoke about it. He reaffirmed it. One day he was talking to a group of all show, no go folks in Matthew 23:23, and he says this, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. What's he saying there? He's saying, hey, fighting for justice and mercy are great things. Those are weighty things. Don't neglect them. But make sure you're taking care of the basics first by demonstrating your trust and tithing. You know, I've heard other groups say, you know, Scott, that was under the law. The tithe was under the law of the Old Testament. And now, you know, Jesus ushered in the New Testament. Now we're under grace, so we don't need to tithe any longer. I just want to sort of explain this real quickly here, right? If you want to pit the Old Testament law against Jesus' form of grace, I just don't think it's going to end up very well for you. Because when Jesus would talk about the Old Testament law versus grace, he would say things like this. He'd always up the standard, right? In the Old Testament, he'd say, it said don't murder, right? But then on the New Testament, under grace, Jesus would say, don't even have hate in your heart, because that'll be the same as murder. In the Old Testament, it says don't commit adultery, and Jesus upped that and says, you even have lust, you've already committed adultery. He's upping the ante all the time from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Jesus would say, you know, the tithe, the Old Testament, yeah, the tithe is your responsibility. But Jesus, when he talked about this, he'd say, tithe, no, give me everything. Remember what he said to the rich young ruler? Sell it all. So under grace, Jesus is always raising the standard. So I just don't think I'd go there. I've always had a lot of people come up to me and say this to me. And maybe you've had someone come up to say this to you. I want to go deeper with God. I want God to trust me more. Man, I want more faith. There sometimes just seems to be something missing. And I've never said this to anybody when they come up to me with that. I want to go deeper. But you know what I sort of sometimes want to say or want to ask? Are you tithing? And I think if I would just confront them with that, when they'd say, I just want to go deeper, and I'd say, are you tithing? They'd say, well, tithing, I'm not talking about money. Scott, I want to talk about going deeper, right? Maybe if you want to go deeper with God, maybe if you want more faith, maybe if you want God to trust you more, you have to start with the basics. Can I just tell you something? 18 years or so ago, I didn't tithe. You know, I gave, but not a tithe. And one reason was I simply did not understand it. Maybe it was partly like, you know, faulty past preaching, but I think mainly it was because I didn't really want to understand it, because I thought I knew best. You know, the one church that I was serving at early on in ministry, they had this huge endowment, millions of dollars in a bank, and I used to get so frustrated that they just sat on it, right? And they wouldn't do enough for this community of Homestead that was hurting all around them. And I thought to myself, I'll show them. I'm not giving to the church. I'm not going to give my tithe. I'm not going to give my money to the church. I'm going to give to these local community efforts and programs in Homestead, right? And then in another church that I served at prior to coming to Northway, I would sometimes think to myself like, hey, listen, they're not paying me, you know, what I could make out there in the real world. And I'm raising little kids, and you know, and I'm sort of a big deal down here in the South Hills. So you know, I'm going to give, but you know, that tithing thing, you know, I just don't know that I can do that yet. See, when I finally grew up spiritually and understood what it meant to be submitted to God and submitted to the authority of the church, I began to tithe, and my whole world changed. And please hear me on this. I don't believe in any of that prosperity gospel nonsense that says God is some big vending machine. That if you put in 10% out pops money and homes and cars and beautiful spouses and clever kids and plush vacations, right? I don't believe in any of that. Jesus said in this world you'll have troubles. He didn't put like a little tag on that says, unless you're tithing. No, he just says you're going to have troubles. So Northway, I hope that over the last 5 or 6 years, I've earned your trust to steward what you're giving well. Because I want you to know I take it really serious. And I feel the weight and the burden that comes with it. But I just want to say this to you, and I really mean it. You know, if you like Northway, but for some reason you don't trust us with your money, then keep coming and tithe to another church. Because this is about you and God, not about Northway. See, when hunting or pursuing your destiny, the focus is so often on taking. But man, when you start turning that corner and start thinking about leaving a legacy, it turns to generosity. It turns to giving. You know, if you want to leave a legacy, hunt generosity. And the tithe is the baseline. When you do that, God's going to bless you, shine on you, trust you with more things than you can ever imagine. This is a big, bold statement, but I believe it with all my heart. I do not believe I would have become the lead pastor of this church if I did not decide to start tithing many, many years ago. Because I don't believe God would have trusted me with it. And I wonder what it is that God might want to do far more than you can even imagine in your life tomorrow, but he can't trust you because you haven't trusted him with today. In my heart of hearts, that's a tough message. I'm done. That's a tough message. And I know there's probably all kind of stuff going on in a lot of people's heads. But there are some people, and I believe dozens or more, 100 plus, they're going to hear this and take it serious. Your life will be changed forever. Your life will be changed forever. The freedom that'll come with that, of knowing that, okay, I tithed, I did what God wanted me to do. He's going to bless my 90%. He's going to point me in incredible directions. He's going to open doors for me. He's going to show me ways to be generous beyond my belief. I believe that some of you, this message will change your life. I want you to know in week 2 of this series, we're not talking about the tithe, okay? Set that aside. Next week, I just want to talk about what do you do when God stirs up something inside of you? A passion. It's going to take some generosity and maybe some sacrifice. How do you pursue that? So why don't you stand up across all of our campuses. I'm going to ask your campus pastor to step up and close out your service.